As a coronavirus lockdown looms, what's the key to working and studying effectively from home?
This week we're checking in with a few work-at-home veterans to see how they stay productive and sane. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner, a long-time tech journalist who, like me, has worked from home for more than a decade. We really should go outside every once in a while. Now, Adam, I believe when you started working from home, you were wearing an onion on your belt?
Well, I am a little bit, I guess, old school is a nice way to put it.
Well, look, the world of tech journalism has more than its fair share of long-time freelancers, so this week we're joined by two special guests. Firstly, a Melbourne technology journo who's covered tech for the major newspapers for many years, Alice Clarke. Alice, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So apart from, obviously, toilet paper by the barrel load, what's in your emergency survival stash?
So I have to admit to personally not having much of a stash because my dad is actually an apocalypse prepper. And I grew up in a kind of pretty secure house built into the side of a mountain with a bomb shelter that was always prepared for any emergency at all times. So if everything goes wrong, I'm just going to visit my dad, who has a lot of hospital-grade disinfectant, masks, and canned foods.
I think we've chosen the right guest
I was
this
just
week.
about to say the exact same thing. I think we've struck gold here this week on Vertical Hold.
Yeah.
And now, under intense pressure to sound as impressive as that, we're also joined by a long-term friend of the show and long-term freelancer, Anthony Caruana. Anthony, do you have anything as impressive as that in your emergency stash?
No, look, I come from good Italian stock, so all we've done is pretty much bought all the pasta that exists, eggs, flour, in case we run out of all the pasta that exists and have to make our own. So that's pretty much my survival plan for the next, decade.
Sounds like a fair plan to me. It's the way I'd go. Now, Adam and I also freelance for some of Australia's largest tech publications. So between the four of us, we've got about, years of
At least
experience
60, probably more.
in working from home. And so I'm guessing we know a thing or two about working remotely.
And in the spirit of mobility and collaboration, the virtual Vertical Hold studio is running over Google Hangouts this week, so anything could happen.
But before we dive into our working from home war stories, there's news in the streaming world, and specifically in the local streaming world, because Netflix has dropped one of its long-term appeal points. Adam, what's the story here?
Well, the idea always with Netflix was that you got a free trial to start with. I think it was a 30-day free trial. Not that you really needed it, because you kind of knew what you were getting yourself into. But it saved you a couple of bucks, and then after the first month, you'd automatically move on to start paying. But also, if you're a little bit shifty, you could just cycle through email addresses and get a hell of a lot of free trials. No more. No more, says Netflix. No suit for you. No free trials.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think they got savvy to the credit card and email thing because they started tracking credit cards, although not every streaming service has done that. Alice, do you think they're in a strong enough position where they can just go, look, we know we've got what you want, come pay us?
Do you think there's any kind of coincidence that they've suddenly dropped the 30-day free trial now that there are millions of people on coronavirus lockdown? They know that, you know what you get with Netflix. If you want Netflix, you will pay for Netflix. It's a brave thing to do when there's Disney Plus out there. But if they're confident and they don't want you to start endlessly 30-daying it, I guess they'll be okay.
What's the streaming situation at your place, Anthony? You in for 30-day trials, or have you already put your money down left, right and centre?
No, Netflix debits a bit of money from me every month. The thing that I find really interesting about Netflix is that their pricing model, which used to be a pretty good model when you compared it to the likes of the pay TV providers, kind of now doesn't look all that great when you compare it to Amazon Prime and to Disney Plus, which you can get for both of those are under $100 a year now, whereas Netflix is considerably more than that.
And Stan's pretty expensive too.
Yeah, and Stan's pretty expensive. My gut feeling is that if they're going to drop the trial, perhaps Netflix needs to also start thinking about maybe offering an annual subscription so people can pay upfront for a year and not get hit with the monthly $12 or $14 or whatever it is dollars. Interestingly, I had my Netflix account hacked a few weeks ago, and I had to deal with Netflix support to get my account back, which was an interesting experience.
I've got to be honest, I don't know that I'd bother doing that. I'd just probably start again. But maybe your recommendations were stronger and better than mine.
Well, it's funny, they did come back to me, and I phoned them, and over the phone they actually got my account back. It had been stolen by someone in Indonesia. They got it back. I got all my viewing history. I didn't have to start over. They just recommended changing the email address I associate with my account, which I did. I've changed to a stronger password, which I don't actually even know what the password is now because I'm using a proper password manager, unlike what I did when I first started using the service. But the customer service was actually really good. So I suspect that stolen accounts is a thing that they have to deal with quite often.
I guess Netflix is just in that more mature space. It's where Disney and Amazon want to be to a certain extent. Disney, certainly, of saying, we've probably got most of the customers we're going to get. We don't need to hand out free trials so we can start jacking the prices up. There's no doubt Disney would do that if they felt they could get away with it.
Yeah, look, probably I'd agree with that. But at the moment, Disney and Amazon seem to be playing the lower price game. Netflix, who knows whether they'll drop their prices. It's interesting. The discussions we have at home sometimes are now, why have we still got Netflix? We probably don't need them with the other guys.
Is anyone taking Amazon Prime seriously as a separate streaming service, though? Isn't it just kind of like a gift with purchase, like Apple TV Plus is? Like, are people paying for Amazon Prime specifically to get Amazon Prime Video, or are they paying for Amazon Prime so they can get the free shipping and the ebook stuff? And, I guess I also get access to the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that because I've always thought that Amazon Prime was a bit of a joke. And the thing that got me across the line was Picard, the new Star Trek. I thought,
absolutely,
all right,
I'd pay $90 to watch Picard.
Yeah. I thought, all right, I'll give him a couple of bucks for a month. I'll watch Picard and then I'll get out. Although, of course, it can't be a month. It's got to be 2 months, whatever, because they string it out to once a week. But then I thought about, well, I've actually bought a couple of things off Amazon recently. And it keeps telling me that if I was a Prime member, I would have free shipping. So considering that it's a lot cheaper than the others, if I allow for the fact that I'm now getting free shipping on things, then I'm maybe getting Amazon Prime for $2 or $3 a month. What the hell? Just give them the money. So I sort of came at it from the other direction, but I then realized that I've fallen for that trap of now when I go to look for things online, my first thought is I should see if it's on Amazon because I get free shipping. So I can see how that psychology works. Yeah.
But also, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is something everyone should watch, and Modern Love. Such good shows.
Dave, when Amazon Prime launched, their selection was actually not great. It was really small. They had a few good originals, some terrible junk, and some really, really old programs. And they've just gotten better and better and better. I think you're totally right, Alice. I don't think too many people subscribe just for the sake of Amazon Prime Video. I think they've now got a service that's actually strong enough for the price that it might just be worth doing so.
Yes, though I have to admit I am an Amazon Video parasite because my upstairs neighbors have it and very kindly signed into it on my Apple TV to watch something here once. And now I'm just going through all the shows I like. But I haven't actually opened it in about 2 or 3 weeks.
I am shocked. Never has such a thing been confessed on this show before.
So, Adam, coronavirus continues to be the lead news topic, not just tech, obviously, of the day, but it's impacting the tech world as well as everything else. And we've discussed that recently kind of in the abstract. It's starting to hit home in a lot more of a concrete fashion now with various government ministers, in fact, suggesting that things like schools will probably inevitably be shut in various different states. A lot of businesses seem to be preparing, and in some cases, I know some tech businesses that have started telling their workers to work from home. And indeed, on the day we're recording this, Google has basically said, hey, if you're a Google employee, don't come into the office for a fortnight. And that kind of raises the prospect of, if you end up in that situation, what do you do? And obviously, as a group of freelancers, we've all done this kind of stuff for a long time. Adam, what's your go-to tech tip for working from home?
So my number one tech tip is to actually know how to use this stuff before you need to use it. Because lots of businesses talk about mobility and talk about, chatting online and Teams and SharePoint and all this stuff. And the same with the kids at school get handed all these tools. But that doesn't mean that, when they're working off site, that they actually know how to be productive with it. You can't just hand everyone a Google subscription or a Microsoft subscription as they walk out the door and say, right, we're going to get down to business tomorrow. So actually know how these things work would be my number one piece of advice. Because I get dragged into all of these things because, like the rest of us, we work with different people. Sometimes I've got bloody Skype and Slack and Teams and everything else running on my computer at the same time. And it's a nightmare because I don't know how they all work because I don't use them often enough. So pick one, figure out who else you're going to be working with, and figure out how to use it all together to actually get things done. What about you, Alice?
I suppose my biggest tip is not actually on the tech, but on having a routine around it. Because the hardest part about working from home is actually working in the home where everything you like is.
Yes.
So
including
even though
the fridge.
Yeah, including the fridge. Oh, so many food. So my tip is actually you need to have a routine where you wake up at the same time, you go to bed at the same time, and pick hours that you work between. And if you're working from home and you don't actually have to be in contact with other people, those can be any hours you want. If you're a night owl, do that if you can. But just make times, have a routine, have a way that you wake up each morning, have a place that you eat breakfast, know the traps that you fall into. I cannot watch TV while I eat breakfast, or I will watch TV for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like things like that.
I find that you've got to have sort of bookends of the day. You've got to have something, even if it's just making yourself your morning coffee that says, right now I'm at work. And then a bookend at the end of the day that says, right now I'm not. Because the thing you don't appreciate when you have a job is the important role that your daily commute plays. That time between when you walk out the front door and when you get to your place of work, you're subconsciously getting yourself into work mode and then you're decompressing on the way home. But when it's literally just standing up and walking across the room to get from one to the other, suddenly you're at home, but you're still in work mode or the other way around. So you need to come up with other ways to get yourself mentally to go through that transition from work to home and back again.
And on that topic, you also need to make sure you have a space that is your workspace.
Absolutely, yeah.
For years, because I started being a freelancer while I was in high school, and back then I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mum, and so there wasn't really a separate space where I could have this is my workplace because I was just at the dining table. And it wasn't until I got my own house that I had a study I could close the door on that suddenly I had a work-life balance.
Yeah.
Because if you work in the places that you play and sleep, you're not going to play, work, or sleep very effectively. You need to separate it out a bit.
And what about you, Anthony?
All of those things are really, really important. For me, the big one is the door. Like being able to actually, you talked about bookends and the commute, and I know Alice was talking about having the space with the door, but the door is the big one. Like at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, that's the time I normally just shut the door on my workspace, and I avoid going there. Like I really just don't go in there unless there's something in that room that I absolutely have to have.
Although you can, and I've done this myself, my home office has relocated to different spaces around my home as my other needs have pushed in. I've had periods where my home office has been a corner of another room, which is, as Alice said, it's less than ideal. It's not as productive as having a separate space with indeed a door where you can close it. And the rest of my family knows, right, if that door is shut and if I'm in here, I'm more than likely working, and they have to, approach with due deference and preferably a cup of coffee. But having that space is important. I think on the tech side as well, there's some stuff that people might not have considered that they might already have that they might want to look at upgrading, like, for example, your broadband. Because if you're sitting on a lower end NBN, or if you're not yet fortunate enough to be on the NBN, or you're on one of the lower grade versions, you might find that what you've got is fine for your evening Netflix binges, but as soon as you've got to start, especially sending files where that upload speed becomes important, or if there are multiple people at home all day, suddenly it might make sense, especially if you're on a month-to-month plan, to say, oh, look, if your system will support it, I'll bump up from the 25 to the 50 or the 50 to the 100.
The other thing that you'll notice is, particularly if you're on cable, that it craps out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Even if you're the only person at home, all the kids who live in your street have come home and they've all turned on Netflix and Spotify at the same time. So you really do see that afternoon slump in performance.
Yeah, you really need to have some kind of backup. When I first moved into my new apartment, there was a miscommunication with my internet provider, and I didn't get internet of any kind for a month.
Oof.
And so, yeah, and I review video games for a living. So try to download them over my mobile data. Like if I tried to do that and go in over my cap, I would bankrupt myself.
So did they just get to know you very well at the local Maccas?
So I got to know my mobile provider extremely well and upgraded all the family's plans so we could share it. I had terse conversations with my home internet provider, and eventually they sent through a dongle and found a way to get a temporary stopgap. But you need to be willing to, if there's something wrong with your internet and you can't work properly, you need to have a backup, and you need to be ready to have polite but firm words with whichever provider has screwed you over or standing between you and being able to get your work done.
What about you, Anthony? What have your broadband woes been like over the years?
Look, I've been very fortunate. The last four properties I've lived in, I've all had cable connections. So in the pre NBN days, I had cable connection with Optus, and then with Telstra, and then with Optus again, and then with Telstra. So I've been pretty fortunate to be able to have good connections. And because of an issue I had when I moved into my current home, the Telstra at the time on my cable, very nicely to make up for all the grief they'd caused me during the connection, upgraded me to their super fast, or whatever they called it, 100 meg download plan. So I had that for a couple of years on and paying the same price as I think the 30 meg was the normal, 30 megabit per second was the normal plan that they had. But then we moved to NBN about 3 or 4 months ago, I think, and I'm still getting, my download speed has dropped from being a bit over 100 to being a little bit under 100. But my upload speeds now, instead of being 5 megabits, is closer to 40. Like I routinely get between 36 and 40 all the time through the RSP that I'm using. So look, I'm pretty happy with the performance I'm getting. We've had a couple of outages. We had one that was a 3-day outage, which was actually caused by a fault further upstream. So it wasn't the RSP's fault; it was NBN Co's fault. And that got resolved. But I can kind of live with outages occasionally. I mean, if it was up and down like a yo-yo every day, I'd be a bit more circumspect about the relationship I had with my RSP, but thus far it's been pretty good.
I think one of the things as freelancers we have probably going in our favor, particularly tech freelancers, is that we have built-in redundancies in what we do, and we're all geared up for the idea of you can work anywhere. So, and that really helps when you need to work from home, or suddenly you can't work from home because there's a problem. The way I'm set up, I can switch from any device to any device and pick up working where I left off. A device could catch on fire in my hands, or the battery could die, or someone could steal it. That's a hassle, but I haven't lost anything. My broadband could drop out, I could switch to my mobile phone. My mobile phone could drop out, I could switch to my USB dongle, which is with a different mobile network, just in case things go down. So we have that redundancy, and that's something that, I guess, depending on how long you're going to be working at home for, and how mission critical what you do is, and how much it would hurt to lose an hour's work, to think about, right, what are my business continuity plans, I guess is what they call it. If you're set up for mobility, kind of business continuity comes fairly easily. But if you've never had to think about working away from your desk before, you can really face a lot of challenges.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. I try to spend 1 day a week working outside my home office. So typically I do that at a local library. So because on the way my week is planned out, usually on a Wednesday I'm out during the day. So I tend to work from a local library on the Wednesday, because then that makes it easier for me to do the other things that I have planned for the Wednesday afternoon. My local library the closest to home has just been renovated and is about to reopen. So I'm looking forward to using that space so that I'm not actually always stuck at home. But one assumes that if what everyone's saying about coronavirus or COVID-19 is correct, then perhaps going to work at the library might be something that I'm going to be able to do a lot less of, assuming that public spaces like libraries might have reduced hours or be closed at some point. But I think because I do that, I'm equipped to be able to say, I'm going to grab my phone and hotspot from my phone. The tablet I use has got its own SIM card. So if the phone runs out of juice, I've still got the tablet that I can hotspot from. Or if I don't want to take my laptop with me because I've got a problem with it or it fails, I can actually work using cloud apps on my tablet as well. So like you, it's about making sure that I've got more than one way to do anything, just in case.
Although you do have to be careful there. When we had the bushfires kind of earlier in the year, we had a major power outage here, and I thought, right, I'll just switch over to the mobile broadband. But of course, everyone else in the same area did pretty much the same, and that network also struggled to keep up. And I think if you're in a position, if your work says, hey, look, just don't come in for a couple of weeks, as Google has done today, that's one thing. If the government says, right, everyone stay home for a fortnight, everyone is going to be hammering those networks as hard as they can all the time.
Yeah, those kind of force majeure things, the insurance companies call them force majeure. They're the kind of things that you go, well, at some point, no matter what steps you take to allow for your own business continuity, something may happen that actually kiboshes all your plans. And that can happen.
So how about you, Alice? What's your plan B?
My plan B is that there is a local... Oh, I can't go to my local library. Well, I've got the usual backups of everything, but if I'm screwed, I'm screwed. I guess I can send it by carrier pigeon. I could write my copy a couple of days early and then mail it to my editors.
Old school. You could fax
You could phone it in.
Yeah. Look, if I get good enough at paper planes, I could possibly even throw it far enough to get it there. Maybe drones could be a good call.
Would they still have one of those ticker tape machines, in the office so you could just send it in Morse code?
Like Gomez Adams had. Oh, no, that was that.
Alex machine. Alex, I remember those well.
I wouldn't be surprised if Harold's son had one of those. But the thing that Anthony talking about libraries reminded me that my wife is a librarian, and she recently had to work from home a bit for a couple of weeks when there was all the bushfire smoke around and she couldn't leave the house. And that presented new and interesting issues because we're used to me working from home, and I'm sure you're all used to you alone working from home. But when you start adding in extra people, you can be really tempted to do some fun things like watch TV or play games. Or you discover that other people make sounds.
Yes.
And so
you're expected to wear pants all the time. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how well you know the other person who's working from home.
True.
But we discovered that we worked best if we were each in separate rooms but brought each other a snack every hour or so.
Yeah,
that's how you work around.
I went through a similar thing where I worked from home for about 15 years, and my wife was on maternity leave twice and then worked a couple of days a week, and then decided when our son got to prep that she would stop working for a couple of years and do the school mum thing. So we then had a bit of a territorial problem because the house between 9 and 5 was mine. It was my space. It was my workspace. Everybody would get out and then they come back. When they got home, that was kind of a signal to me as, all right, it's time to wrap things up because it's now not work time anymore. But suddenly she was standing in my office and she's like, no, you're standing in my lounge room. And I'm like, yeah, that's a fair point. So we had to kind of figure out, as you're saying, this kind of territorial kind of thing, right? Okay, this can be my space over here and this can be your space over here. And we understand that we need to give each other a bit of room, but also depending on the size of your house, you may not have a lot of space to give each other. So you do need to come up with those things, especially like it could be that if they close the schools as well, you could have half a dozen people in the house together. Some of them are trying to work. Some of them are maybe trying to get schoolwork done. You're going to have to figure out pretty quickly how you actually get things done.
And also make sure you have enough devices for everybody to be getting things done that have enough bandwidth to do the things they need to do in the way they need to do them.
Well, most high school kids at least probably have a notebook or a tablet or something like that. But that, again, goes back to what I was saying before. My kids are both in high school and they both have notebooks and they both have Office 365 subscriptions and Google accounts and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that they or the school actually know how to do any kind of tally education or whatever you want to call it. I mean, the School of the Air, I think, might be in high demand to actually teach schools how to do this, but I'm not confident that the school would actually know how to run a class online.
There was a great story that came out of China this week with because obviously within parts of China, all the schools have been closed down and all the kids are at home. So a number of the schools have been using a specific app to give out homework.
Mm.
And the kids worked out that if the app had a 1-star or less rating, it would be pulled out of the App Store. So overnight, like tens of thousands of kids rallied and downscored the app on the App Store so that it would be removed and the teachers couldn't give them homework anymore.
That is gold.
That's so good. At least kind of our uni system is set up to do reasonable distance education. Like most universities have online education courses. I know my wife works for a uni that is half online and half in person. But they know
at university. Two of my kids are at university, and they, because they have timetable clashes, for example, they've got classes that they only ever attend virtually after the fact for lectures, for example.
I'm doing study myself at a university that's nowhere near where I live, and that's all completely virtual. But coming from a family of teachers, I think the challenge there as well is the level of the kids, because I think this could hit, for example, HSC students a lot harder than anyone else. Because even if it's only 2 weeks, 2 weeks out of your HSC year is still a decent chunk of time. Going further down the years, I could see a setup where they just say, look, the Easter school holidays are coming up. They'll be 3 weeks instead of 2, or 4 weeks instead of 2. They might just say, no, we'll just close those rather than necessarily trying to push through, because it's also a big ask, I think, for a lot of kids to say, right, well, you've still got to be at school, but you're at home. So all those things, as Alice was saying before, all those things that you like are here, but you can't do that. You've got to pay attention to the teacher. The teacher can't entirely tell that they've got your focus 100% either. I think it starts to hit into a too hard basket, especially as you tumble down the age brackets.
And it's interesting what you were saying there. You think about just what we've set up today with this podcast. We've got a tool that's allowing 4 of us to speak. And just to make sure that we conserve the bandwidth, we've switched off the video, which is, I'm not upset about at all, not having to see some of your faces, particularly Adam's, I suppose. But, the thing is...
It's the mileage.
But the thing is that when you're talking about a classroom, suddenly we're talking about a teacher trying to engage with, depending on the year level and the subject, they might be engaging between 5 and 30 kids at one time. And all of a sudden, it may not be the bandwidth the kids have got at home. It becomes what's available at the schools. And as the former IT director at a school, I know that was a constant battle, was actually trying to make sure that we had enough bandwidth to deal with all the stuff we had inside the school without even thinking about the fact that we might have, 25 teachers at any one given moment trying to communicate with 25 kids that are off campus. The bandwidth issues for the schools is a really big issue as well.
But on the bright side, I find that you actually can be a lot more productive when working from home once you have everything set up. So that's good.
You don't get dragged into as many meetings, hopefully.
Well, depends on which kind of work. But
although Alice, that also shifts nicely into something that I was going to ask as a kind of group question, because part of that setup is actually getting the gear in place. And for a lot of people, work might have supplied you a laptop, but that's probably it. What's your go-to or must-have bit of actual hardware that makes doing your job easier?
Because of the way our job works, I really just need a computer with a keyboard that can run Word and access to an Xbox, a PlayStation, a Nintendo Switch, and a reasonable TV. So the tech requirements aren't so great if you're just writing or doing Excel spreadsheets or things like that. So I guess my thing that I need is a good speaker, so you don't feel quite so alone. So you've got a bit of music in the background so you don't go crazy and talk to yourself constantly. You still do that.
I was going to say, you say that like it's a bad thing.
No. But look, I will completely acknowledge that in the many years where I was only going to the gym once a week and I was inside all the time and the only people I talked to was my wife or my mother, depending on which time of life, I got weird. And I'm still a bit weird. I think anybody who's been working from home for a long time is just a little bit socially uncomfortable, but in a way that works for them. So your biggest problem is not what is the tech that you require to get the work done, because you probably just need a laptop. It's what's the tech that you require to get the work done and not go insane.
Anthony, what about you?
Look, for me, I could probably get by almost entirely with just a good tablet. I'm happy to type on almost anything. If I can connect a Bluetooth keyboard to my tablet, I'm probably going to be able to get by. There's an app that I use on. I've got an iPad, and I've got an app that I use on that called Notability, which is an essential for me because it lets me record interviews and take notes at the same time, and it synchronizes the handwriting with the audio, making it really easy for me to write stories afterwards and not have to mess around with lots of transcription and so forth. So I could get by with with just an iPad basically most of the time. But in a perfect world where I might need to be offline and not have to rely on having access to cloud services all the time, then a laptop is my go-to. I can spend 2 or 3 days away from my office with just the iPad and get by. But for any more than that, I like having my laptop with me just because it's just I've got more tools on it. As if I need to quickly go and edit an image, it's much easier for me to do it using that tool. Things like that. And headphones. My gosh, good headphones.
Absolutely.
So I can blank out the rest of the world if I have to.
Actually, I'm going to add to that. You need a good keyboard. You need a keyboard that you would comfortable.
Thank you. This was exactly what I was fishing for.
Yeah. You need a keyboard that doesn't make you think about anything, that you don't notice, except that it's comfy and nice. And I have 2 that I go between. I've got one on my PC and one on my Mac. And any other keyboard, I'll review them. I'll see how they go for the things that they need to do to be reviewed. But then I'll go back to my proper keyboard to write.
Typing on an iPad is horrible. Typing on a slab of glass is horrible. And even those Microsoft Surface things with the really thin keyboards built into this cover, no, a keyboard's got to have a bit of give, a bit of travel, I think is what they call it. Yeah, it really makes a difference.
I must be one of the least fussy writers out there because I don't really care what I type on as long as the words get out and I get paid.
We get paid?
Every now and then.
I can type on anything. I think we all can. But yeah, there is not a laptop in existence that has a keyboard that I want to type on. Whereas I love, in a way that's possibly against God, my Microsoft ergonomic keyboard. It's just the best.
The old the old IBM ThinkPads had very nice keyboards on them.
For a laptop, sure, but it's still, I am so much more productive with a good, preferably with my ergonomic or a good mechanical keyboard, something with a bit of travel, something that makes a bit of a machine gun noise when I'm going, because when I get going, it's very hard to stop me. It's a huge productivity boon. And I use that with a laptop. I use that plugged into a laptop, even though it adds space to my desk, because it adds so much more to my productivity story.
A good keyboard is the difference between a story taking 45 minutes to write and 3 hours.
Yes.
And it just flows better. And I do love the mechanical keyboards that make you sound like you're in a 1940s newsroom. But when my wife was working from home, I did nicely move back to the slightly quieter keyboard, which I still like, my backup keyboard. Because the 1940s newsroom is good for you, but it's not something you can bring to a place where there are other people without them wanting to stab you.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Alice for making time for the show this week.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Alice, where can folks find your writing, or indeed your good self, online?
So you can find me on Twitter at AliceDKC. You can read me in the Sunday Herald Sun every week. I do the games, tech, and apps. Or you can read me in The Age.
Also, Anthony, thanks for making time for the show this week.
My pleasure, as always.
And pretty much the same question, where can folks find you or your writing online at the moment?
At the moment, you will find a pretty good smattering of my work at lifehacker.com.au. You'll find a bit of it over at ZDNet as well. And as I say to everyone, the best way to find stuff out about me is to Google my name, and whatever I've been working on seems to generally float to the top. And on Twitter, of course, on Anthony_Caruana.
And of course, you can catch up with us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. good luck if you get locked in for a couple of weeks. Hopefully this can help you be a little bit more productive during that time. We're on a big subscriber push. So, if you've got nothing to do, if you're trapped at home, listen to a podcast, recommend it to your friends, help us get out the good word to be bigger and better in 2020. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband.